Okay. All right. I'm Michelle Rehill, Chairperson of the Board of Library Trustees, and I call this meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. Um, I had been advised that I do not have to read the governor's advisory. I merely have to say that this meeting is being recorded. It is being held entirely remotely, and there will be no public comment at the meeting. I do still have to do roll call, however. So, if you are here, please say aye so that we can make sure we can hear you. Brittany Burns,
Aye.
Mitch Cohen,
Aye.
Mandy is not here. Pat Fonts,
Aye.
Jim Hogan,
Jim Hogan, aye.
Jocelyn McKelney,
Aye.
Beth Thomas,
Aye.
Richard Tucker. Oops, you're muted. Can you unmute just for a moment? Or not? Jen, can you grab that one?
Aye, finally.
Thank you, Richard. I'm Michelle Rehill. I'm
High
here.
tech, it's just getting me.
High tech. It'll get you every time.
Yeah.
All right. Also with us tonight, we have Library Director Jen Bruno, and we have Assistant Library Director Caitlin Stacy with us. So, having gotten through that part of the meeting, would anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes from the March 11th, 2025 and the April 8th, 2025 Library Trustee meetings?
So moved for both.
So moved, Mitch, that was you.
And
Yes.
I will second Jocelyn McKelney.
Jocelyn, thank you, Jocelyn. See you all fighting to be the one to do that. If there are no comments, corrections, or anything, I will ask for people to vote yes on this, or actually you can respond however you choose. Opposed, in favor of accepting the minutes as presented, please say aye. Aye, yes, no, whatever. Brittany Burns.
Brittany Burns, aye.
Okay. Mitch Cohen.
Mitch Cohen, yes.
Pat Fonts.
Pat Fonts, aye.
Jim Hogan.
Jim Hogan, we.
See, Jocelyn McKelney.
Jocelyn McKelney, aye. What just happened?
Something got lost in translation.
Oh dear.
Beth Thomas.
Beth Thomas, aye.
Richard Tucker.
Richard Tucker, aye.
And Michelle Rehill also says aye. The motion carries to accept unanimously to accept the minutes from the March 11th and April 8th, 2025 Library Trustee meeting. All righty. The next thing on the agenda is the appropriations report. Are there any questions or comments about the appropriations report?
If I could unmute, I have a quick comment, if that's okay.
Sure.
It always, at this point, looks like we have a lot of collection money left. In this specific case, there's a lot left in the non-print, but that is because I knew we were canceling Hoopla. And what I want to do is spend quite a bit of money and invest in our overdrive collection so that there's a seamless sort of transition. So right now I'm kind of going through the highest ratio of copies based on like holds. So I can see like what Northborough residents have holds on and how many holds there are overall and how many copies. So what we're doing is we're going to work on turning on either purchasing additional copies or turning on this other model, which is a cost per circ, which is the way that Hoopla worked, where you pay when somebody checks the book out. So for select titles, we'll be turning that on. So overall, 80% of the budget is spent, which is pretty much on track with where we are in the fiscal year. But I just wanted to point that out because it looks like we have a lot left, but that's really just a little because the expenses this year are kind of backloaded on the end of the fiscal year.
Okay. Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Jen, I saw the list of databases that's going to get eliminated in next year's budget. It's really
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, Caitlin and I are gonna have a meeting tomorrow to kind of decide. This might be maybe not appropriation report, but if I could, we're gonna have a meeting tomorrow. Caitlin has already actually reached out to them to see, she's checking into a different database. So while she has that meeting set up, she's gonna talk to them about what amount of money. So if you guys aren't aware, the MBLC issued a list of the databases that they're not going to be continuing into fiscal year 2026 as a result of funding reductions from the federal government. As a result of the dismantling of the IMLS, there is $0 budgeted in the current bill for IMLS for next year. So if that stays the way that it is, the MBLC will have to cut. Sorry, I'm getting feedback from somebody. I don't know if everybody wants to just mute. That might help. Okay. Sorry about that. So Gale has a lot, the vendor Gale has a lot of those databases that are being dropped, a lot of which are for elementary school, middle school, and high school students that are doing research projects and homework. So we're going to be looking at our collection budget, what is the most important, and that may or may not be the things that are used the most, to see where we can supplement what we're losing. Maybe if we're losing something that isn't used by Northborough residents, that's okay. But maybe there is something that's really critical that we want to make sure that we continue to offer. And then the first Friday of June, I'll have an executive committee meeting with CW Mars. And one of the things that I've asked that we could talk about is maybe, is there some cost savings if a few libraries go in together? Like if we do lose this funding, what are our options for continuing to be able to offer this stuff? Because a lot of the information is the most current research and we don't have another way to offer it. It's not a print book. You know, a lot of this is journal articles, encyclopedia articles that are updated weekly, and things that just, it's not feasible to have in a print book because of the frequency with which they're updated. So it's good, I think, that I held some money back for the Hoopla switch because, you know, the databases are fully funded right now. But if they're not going to be funded in the near future, then we're going to have some harder decisions to make, and we may have to trade some things, reduce some of, like, maybe some of it comes from our media budget. Maybe we have to make some harder decisions and stop, you know, some of the least popular or least important, least critical databases or something like that. So stay tuned.
Very sad.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just that it's very sad.
Michelle's mouth is moving, but you're muted.
I keep forgetting. I'm not usually muted because I talk all the time. But that's not great news, but thank you for letting us know about that. Yes, Mitch.
On the budget, I appreciate that the trust funds are in the packet. That's very, very helpful. Was it the administration committee or one of the committees going to go through and prepare? I think we should learn a little bit more about what these funds are and start to make some decisions or reflect on decisions that have already been made about what some of these things will be used for. Again, I'm thinking forward to upcoming town budget discussions, and I want to make sure that we have good evidence that we need these funds and that they don't simply supplement our budget, that they're for specific things outside the budget.
The Long Range Planning Committee is planning to meet on that, and I should have done this sooner, but I've just been preoccupied and I haven't been able to put it together, but give that a priority and get it done within the next couple of weeks. So
Great.
exactly what you're saying.
Fantastic. That's really good to hear. Thank you, Jim.
You're absolutely right. And we'll put that up. Thank you.
In addition to that, discussion about trust funds and making sure that those are well understood by the committee and other committees, I think there will be a lot of discussions in our near future about just funding in general. It seems like it's not hitting us, like I'm not panicking, but I think it's just wise to stay ahead of it. We're going into a tight budget year. The sooner we start having conversations about it, I think the better, especially with a question mark from the federal funding sources, the state funding, and then local conversations, particularly, some of the things that we heard at town meeting. So I think the town will start having conversations a little bit sooner this year. I think for me, I'd like to have those conversations maybe even a little bit sooner, just so that we're well prepared for whatever ends up happening.
Good
Thank
to
you.
hear. Thanks, Jen.
Any other questions or? No, we're going to move on to the library director's report.
Sorry if that bummed you all out. Do you have any questions about my report?
Jen, I don't have any questions, but I just want to thank the staff again for the monthly stories. All of them were very touching. My favorite was the snack attack with the kids, and that just it hits so many points. It's an activity that, call snack attack and you're going to think it's one thing, but it actually, when you drill down more into what they were doing, it just hits so many amazing points for these kids that's a core memory, right? That's something that they're gonna build off of. So appreciate all of that yet again. So thank you to everybody.
Yeah, when I went into their children's office today, they were portioning out ice cream from Yulman's.
Come
Yulman's
on.
donated 11 flavors of ice cream for Snack Attack. So they all
That's
got to
amazing.
try 11 flavors of ice cream and vote on their favorites.
And you didn't invite us?
I know. I would have volunteered at that.
Yeah,
I
me
did
I'll
ask
say
too.
the
them
same
if they
thing.
would consider me to be a third grader for the purposes of
Do you know which one was the favorite?
to be announced. I will
Okay.
ask them to put that into the next monthly story.
Please.
That sounds fun.
I also just want to say I really appreciated the little diagram of where the sign is going to go, an explanation of where the sign is going to go. That was very helpful, I think, and smart to head off any questions of why is it not.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not complicated, but like the property line, it turns out, is so bizarre that Scott Charpentier ended up just spray painting it so he could show me where it was. And then it was sort of like, well, this is the only logical place for the sign. And thank goodness we had that amount of frontage so that the sign could go in a place where you can actually see it. But I do think, one, people may ask why it's not centered. So now we at least know how to answer that question. But also for the future, if there's ever anything else that we want to do on the lawn, we're really limited by that like weird, chunky, angled property line.
I'm glad the tree won't be impacted though, because that would be a whole other.
I also knew someone would ask about the tree, so I just wanted to put that out there that the tree will be fine.
Yay. All right.
A random question. The tree is fine now, but how big is that tree going to get? Will it be an issue 30 years from now for some poor trustees who are on this board, in 2055?
I can ask. I actually don't know what kind of tree offhand that is or how big it plans to get, but there was some other landscaping around the library that we've had to cut down because it wasn't like the ultimate mature size of it wasn't thought about maybe when it was planted. Hopefully that's not the case with that tree. But it's a good point, and I'll make a note and I'll follow up.
And also, we could pivot and give this to the long range planning committee. I don't know if we have that team built yet, but that could be maybe something they take on.
Yeah, you're going out on a limb there.
Oh, Jim, no. Bye. That's it.
Very good, Jim.
I can't
Wow.
believe you said that.
I'll branch
That
off
was-
into something else.
No, we're not branching off that one, Jim. No, you had one joke. You get one.
You said branch.
Yeah, because he said it.
Okay, I'll leave it alone.
Righty. Well, before anybody, any other ideas about tree puns, I wanted to say congratulations to Rachel Hutchins for being chosen for the
Yes.
leadership program. Very
Yeah.
exciting.
Yes.
It's a great program.
It's not surprising to me that she was chosen, but I know it was very competitive and I'm very impressed. Happy to hear about it.
Anybody from Massachusetts who makes it into that program should be so, so, so proud of themselves because it's so competitive.
Yeah, this year, so I am the leadership chair this year that took over from Jen. We had like over 40 applicants just from Massachusetts alone. And only 4 seats get chosen. And if a seat does open up, like waitlisted people can get in, and she was in the top 4 that could go. So it was really cool to hear that and see it. Because I don't get to vote. I just get to sit. I know it's in there, but I don't get to do anything with it. So when it came back and I was like, I think that's her number. When I found out it was, I got so excited. So yeah, so after over 40 applicants and being graded against all of these incredible people, like to have her among them was just like so exciting.
Yeah. And just in case you were not aware, because I didn't know how to put this in the report, Caitlin is the chair of the committee that puts that on, but has nothing to do whatsoever with the selection of the applicants. She's the administrator of the program, so she does a lot of the behind the scenes work to make this happen for people. But the process is anonymous completely. So the institution is crossed off and blacked out. Everything is blacked out. So even the people who are doing the scoring don't know that that person works with us. They don't know her name. The recommendation that I wrote for her did not include my name so that people weren't. So we try to make it as merit-based as possible. So, but also like a huge props to Caitlin because this was her first year as the chair of that committee and it's so much work and she did such a great job.
Thank you. I slept a lot. I would have been like, I wanted to piggyback off of Gem. I wanted to make like a tree and leaf after the end.
Don't
you.
encourage him. Don't encourage him.
I have a
mute myself on
competitor.
that point.
All righty. If we're done with the library director's report, I don't think we have any old business we have to cover, do we?
Not that I could remember.
I think we got through all the policy conversations that were pushed out.
Okay. So we will move on to new business. The first item being the slate of officers for the next fiscal year. Would the nominating committee like to present their slate?
I guess I'll step in and do it. Yeah, so first, I just want to thank everybody. We decided to take a little bit of a different approach this year and open it up to the whole committee and see who is interested. I think it had been 4 or 5 years without any like rotation of leadership. So we thought that was a new and exciting opportunity. And some new people stepped up and said, I'd really be interested in this. So we had a long discussion, and in the end, we had 2 positions that had multiple volunteers and 2 positions that had 1 each. And that resulted in what we thought was like a really well-rounded kind of balance for new and kind of veteran leadership, with 2 positions remaining the same and 2 positions with new nominees. Sorry, my dog's excited about this too. So who we're presenting for our slate of nominees, we have Michelle Rehill for chair, Jocelyn McElhenney for vice chair, Beth Thomas for treasurer, and Jim Hogan for secretary. If anyone has questions, or we'd be happy to chat.
No, I
Did I
have.
cover it okay, Beth and Jim?
Okay. Yeah, we can't see Jim do that. Um, all right. Do we have to make a motion to accept the slate? I do this every year. Or if we have a
I don't
vote,
think it would hurt.
a
Or
vote
do we vote on it now, or do we vote on it at our June meeting?
I feel like we vote on it at the next meeting.
That's
the
what
Like
I
next
think,
it's presented now, and then any
Yeah.
it's presented now, so we don't actually need to vote on it now. It gets presented now, and then the vote actually occurs at the June meeting, which is the annual meeting, all right?
yes.
Okay, good. That's what my brain was telling me, but somehow I was thinking we had a vote to accept it. All right.
So with that said, I just want to thank everybody who has served in offices. We really appreciate you, Mitch and Richard, and thank you also to Jocelyn and Beth for volunteering to try something new. I think this is really exciting. But thank you to everyone.
Jocelyn, do I remember that you were vice chair, maybe even chair for a year a long time ago? Or
I had covered as treasurer.
covered
Our
as treasurer?
treasurer
Okay.
decided to like
Yeah.
backpack through Europe for a year or something.
Okay. Okay.
So
Oh,
I
yes.
stepped in as
Okay. I knew
treasurer
you.
for a year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I
And
remember you had some position.
yeah, and I've covered as secretary for Jim on the few occasions where he hasn't made meetings.
Mhm.
So I've been dabbling in some of the positions. So I thought it
Yeah.
was time to like actually throw my hat in the ring.
I like that, dabbling.
Excellent. I'm glad.
Thank you. I appreciate that people are willing to step up. And I appreciate the thought that went into the process, and what you guys all did. So thank you. All right, this is it, Jen. Are you ready for your big presentation on the explanation of the library meeting use laws and policy?
I so am. It will be a relief to you all to know
No.
that this is short. Don't give me the axe, Jocelyn. I worked hard on this. All right, I'm done. I promise. Yes, this is brief. Hold on, at this point, I have my notes on one screen and the presentation on this one. So let's see here. Wrong button. Hold on. I'm gonna stop sharing so that you don't watch me fumble around with this.
Screen sharing is so much pressure.
Seriously.
Yes.
I always share my browser that has my 37 emotional support tabs open across the top.
All right, you can see this?
Mhm.
Okay. The first thing that I'm going to tell you is that I am not a lawyer, and that it has been a very long time since I've had any kind of law class and done any kind of case review. So with that being said, there are some legal cases that are referenced in here. I have cited my sources so that you can look at them in more detail, but in terms of anytime a library is looking at a policy, really what I turn to is the American Library Association, because they're the ones that have had lawyers sort of vet what they're recommending to people. And they are the ones that do the in-depth analysis of any kind of case decisions and decide how it applies to library services. So what I'm presenting to you today is sort of their analysis and interpretation and recommendations of how you should conduct or make decisions based on meeting room use. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, now we'll switch. Here we go. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to tell you is there is a difference between a library-sponsored program and public meetings. So a library program is something that's vetted and sponsored by the library. It's covered by our library program policy. It means it's planned and executed by library staff, maybe by ourselves or in conjunction often with partners that we have vetted. It's related to the mission and goals of the library. We are not talking about any of that today. What we're talking about is a public meeting, which is not vetted or sponsored by the library. We are simply making the room available for people to use. And this is something that somebody else has planned and executed. It's covered by our library meeting and conference room policy. It's an entity other than the library, and it may not have anything to do with our mission or goals, except for the mission to provide public meeting space to facilitate the exchange of ideas. Rules determining meeting room usage in public libraries is really just determined by two different documents, the United States Constitution and the Library Bill of Rights, which honestly, the Library Bill of Rights is just a professional document that interprets library services in light of the Constitution. I'm gonna lose my place immediately. So I won't go into the entire Bill of Rights. It's not a super long document. If you want to read it, I'm happy to send it to you. But essentially, there is one specific part of the Library Bill of Rights that covers library meeting room use. And then they have further developed this additional document called Meeting Rooms and Interpretation of the Library Bill of Rights. That is a more full explanation of what is essentially just one sentence. So those are the things that when we're making a library meeting room policy, those are the things that we're looking at. The Library Bill of Rights states that such facilities, if you're going to make meeting rooms available, those facilities should be made available to the public that is served by that library. So your residents of your town or your municipality, your city or whatever, on an equitable basis, regardless of the beliefs or affiliations of individuals or groups requesting their use. So now everything else that I'm going to say to you is basically this phrased differently under different stress tests. Basically, if you have a meeting room, you have to make it as available as possible. It means that the library is not required to provide public meeting space, but if it should choose to offer such space, it has to be equitable in how it's doing that, which means that there are very few restrictions that we can put on the types of use. What does that mean? In practice, what that means, sorry, let me get to my correct notes. Essentially, it means that if you're going to have good policies, that you're only excluding activities that substantially interfere with the access to library facilities, the safety of users and staff, and that is actual safety. That is real safety. That's not a hypothetical, we might feel unsafe, but that is like, you can't light fireworks off in the room, right? There's actual safety involved. And the protection of the library resources and facilities. So they can't do anything that would permanently damage the building or prohibit use in such certain ways. They can't be any more restrictive than needed to serve their objectives. And it must be solely on actual behavior, not upon arbitrary distinctions between individuals or groups based on any of the things that rules sometimes get made based on: gender, your ideology, your religion, age, disability, disease, etc. And you have to enforce them consistently across the board. So if you're going to have a rule in your meeting room policy, it has to apply to everybody without exception. Otherwise, you risk not providing equitable access to the room. So some examples of things, you can exclude all commercial use. You can say that nobody can exchange money and use the meeting room. So they can't charge fees, they can't take collections, no donations of any no monetary exchange of any sort. What you can't say is, okay, nonprofits can charge money or take collections, but religious groups can't, or commercial groups can't. It has to be enforced consistently in order for it to withstand a legal challenge, essentially. You can require bookings be made by a resident or a group that directly serves the town. Because that, there's in the Bill of Rights, it says that it's provided to the residents that you directly serve. So you can limit it to Northborough residents only. What you can't do is say that you must be a card holder in good standing in order to do this. That presents inequities. You can limit the frequency of use, but it has to be consistent across the board. You can prohibit social events such as weddings or baby showers, but you can't prohibit use by a religious group, for example. You can exclude individuals and groups who violate your policy, but you can't exclude individuals or groups who have fringe or controversial ideas. Courts have consistently held that libraries are limited public forums. There is a very specific definition of a limited public forum. It does not mean full public forum. It means that it's created for a very specific type of use. And that enables, and if you have a limited public forum, basically what you can do is put reasonable restrictions on how that public forum is conducted. So we're allowed to have policies that say you can only use the meeting room 10 times a year or something like that. In turn, libraries can designate areas within their buildings for community use and the exchange of information. We're allowed to create rules for their use. As with collections, these rules are viewpoint neutral, and that is the sticking point with all of these legal challenges. They have to be viewpoint neutral and address only objective use and behavior restrictions. So you can control the noise level, but you can't control whether that noise is singing or yelling, for example. It just has to be some objective rule that says you can't create noise that they can hear down the hall at the desk, for example. As long as you're enforcing that consistently, that's okay. I'm going to give you a couple examples of things that have come up in courts. I'm not going to get into the details of each case. Don't make me do it. I'll start throwing leaf puns out there instead.
Don't do it.
I know Jocelyn will be so happy. This one specifically, the Faith Center Church Evangelistic Ministries versus Glover, raised the question whether libraries could exclude religious groups or religious worship. The court ultimately determined that a policy that prohibits worship services was not legal. And that is because in order to determine the difference between what is a worship service and what is religious speech, which is protected speech, staff had to determine on their own whether the proposed use of the meeting room constituted a worship service, which is a violation of the Establishment Clause. Interestingly enough, allowing religious groups to use the public meeting room consistent with your viewpoint neutral policies is not a violation of the Establishment Clause. You can do that, it's fine. What you can't do is make a determination on your own what is religious worship and what is religious speech. It's the same. There's no difference. There's too many shades here and there of like requiring somebody to use a subjective opinion. So it can't be distinguished from other religious speech. Exclusion is viewpoint discrimination. So you cannot exclude a group because they're engaged in worship. That is protected speech. What you can say is that a specific group can only book the meeting room once a month or for only a certain specific amount of time, and that they can't collect money and that they can't create so much noise that they're a disturbance to people in the lobby. So singing and church organ music or any other things that tend to happen in a church service would just sort of be limited by those neutral rules. So you can't meet every week at the same exact time and book that, forever. You can only have a certain number of meetings on the books at a time, and the time spot is not guaranteed or reserved for anybody. So those are the things that are okay versus just excluding people because what they're doing is religious. Does that make sense? So the next one is Concerned Women for America versus the Lafayette County and Oxford Public Library. The question here was whether meeting rooms are a designated public forum. And the important thing to know here is that the court did determine that, yes, they're limited public forums, as we kind of mentioned already. You cannot exclude a group based on the subject matter to be discussed or the ideas for which they advocate. So the main takeaway here, again, emphasizes that your policies have to be viewpoint neutral. Concerned Women for America, just to give you a little bit of an idea, is a conservative evangelical group. Ironically enough, I think it's run by the wife of Dennis Lehane, who wrote the Left Behind series, which was a huge, huge children's chapter book series, especially when I was working in North Carolina. Their views, among other things, include an opposition to abortion, an opposition to same-sex marriage. They oppose stem cell research. They oppose secular education. The court did rule that you're not allowed to exclude them just based on their ideas that they're advocating for. If anybody can book the room and use the room, then so can they. And all that makes sense. And then you get to, what if what they're advocating for is hateful, it's offensive, it's emotionally distressing? Just the simple fact of what they're there to speak about is distressing to people who are in the vicinity of the speaker while it's going on. And here I'm giving you Snyder versus Phelps, which is a court case that involved the Westboro Baptist Church. And if you're not familiar with them, I'm sorry for what I'm about to tell you. It's a group who came into the public light because they protest military funerals. And the slogans that they use on their signs are very inflammatory, very intentionally provocative. They're very emotionally charged, right? And they're holding these protests at an emotionally charged time, which is at a funeral for a service member. While this does not specifically address library meeting rooms, this ruling applies to all public spaces. So the First Amendment requires that the government strictly protects robust debate on matters of public concern, even when such debate devolves into distasteful, offensive, or hateful speech that causes others to feel grief, anger, or fear. It is still protected speech. We cannot say no to a group because we anticipate that what they're going to say is going to be offensive, even if most people are offended by it. So again, you lean back to your well-crafted meeting room policy, which limits people to you have to live in Northborough, or you have to be a group that directly serves Northborough. And this policy restriction alone will head off a lot of these problems, because a lot of the library, the stories that I've read about and the ones that we hear about tend to be libraries who don't have a policy such as that, and they allow anybody to book the room, which you can do, but that opens you up to more of a national conversation. So there are a lot of cases where groups are specifically looking for communities that might be susceptible to a specific message. and they're booking library meeting rooms and holding speeches and things at those places. So we are protected from something like that because you have to be a Northborough resident. So it has to be something that resonates within your community. Otherwise, you cannot book the room. But what about Nazis? This is something that probably in 2019 was a big discussion in the library community. This one, Hale versus Schaumburg Township District Library, ultimately was settled outside of court. So there's no legal court ruling that I can show you here. But Matthew Hale is the leader of the World Church of the Creator, which is a white supremacist group. He booked meeting rooms in a lot of different communities, including the closest one that I could find was Wallingford, Connecticut, to give speeches on white pride. He is well known as a white supremacist, and I believe is serving jail time for something related to, I think he was disbarred for his white supremacist views. It's about as, like, when you're talking about black and white in terms of like everybody can generally agree that something is or isn't offensive. Maybe this is something that's about as clear as it gets. There's no legal definition of hate speech that I could find. And the ALA notes that there's no legal consensus on what is and isn't hate speech. This went on for a very long time and prompted a lot of discussions at the ALA level, at the state and regional library association levels. A lot of the library groups that I'm a part of, I had the sort of pleasure or ability to kind of sit in on some of these discussions that were going on at the time. And then, of course, COVID happened and we moved on to other things. But the takeaway here is, even in this case where there was a protests and threats against the library and a really clear perception that there was going to be some safety issues, maybe some riots, things like that. The presiding judge in this specific case made it very clear that he saw it as a First Amendment issue, not a public safety issue. The perception of violence or the potential for violence, the potential for threats was not enough to justify limiting somebody's First Amendment speech. So ultimately, this person was allowed, in libraries that do not have a local restriction on who can book the room. He was allowed to hold his speech there because even if we really objectively, or nothing is objective when it comes to speech, right? There's always some subjectiveness to it, but it does not matter what that speech is. And that has been upheld over and over and over again. You can't keep groups out of your public library. You can choose to stop offering a public meeting room. You're under no obligation to provide that. But if you do, you have to fairly enforce viewpoint neutral policies. So the library cannot build a free and welcoming environment by silencing ideas that offend other people. But also protecting the expression of somebody's First Amendment rights is not an endorsement or normalization of hate. That was a several-year conversation that we had at in our professional circles. Are we endorsing it? Are we normalizing it? We are not. We are simply upholding the expression of your First Amendment right to free speech. And really hammering down the idea that it's a public forum for the exchange of ideas for your community. And I think that's the very important part. I'm going to send this out. If you want to continue to dig into it, I have additional reading. I have cited all of my sources. This 5 or 10 minute, however long that was, presentation took me about 18 hours of reading to just sort of whittle it down. So in the end, that is what it is. So you have to be very mindful that your policies are viewpoint neutral and that you're fairly enforcing them and that you're not introducing any restrictions that may have an unintentional bias. I am happy to take puns or questions.
That was intended for me, right?
Don't
For
do it, Jim.
Jocelyn.
Don't do it, Jim.
Anyone who was planning to make a pun. Yes, Pat, you had something to say?
Just that you were talking about the Westboro Baptist Church, which brought back some really bad memories. The Westboro that these people are from are in Kansas.
Yeah.
And at the time in Westboro, Massachusetts, we had the First Baptist Church. And those poor people were getting picketed and, hated upon. And it was just a mess. So I'm kind of glad that they simmered down and, they made it real clear, we have nothing to do with whoever these people are. But just an aside from everything else, but it was kind of a disaster for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the one last point that I would make is it may be helpful to remember that hate speech is a very elastic term, and people have used it to apply to Black Lives Matter movements and book clubs. So it's definitely not a term that everybody agrees on it. Like, you'd like to think you'd know it when you saw it, but that's not necessarily true. So in protecting things or people's right to host their own meeting about and have a public exchange of ideas, we're protecting a lot of different people who also have the right to do that.
I'd jump in here too. I mean, the social studies teacher and me could talk about First Amendment cases all night, but I won't. I'll save that for class. But I would say I think one of the takeaways from this too is that as the policy committee, I would think about what are some of the guidelines and restrictions that you can put in place to help prevent escalation of behavior, right? You can't, obviously, it has to be neutral, but we could think about things like noise restrictions, capacity limits, disruption of library business, things like that. That you would
Right.
apply in any situation, but to kind of head off some of those sticky ones. But I don't know. I for one do think that the local restriction is a really good idea. And I think it's also valuable to have this public meeting space. There's a little bit of a risk that comes with it, but I think that it's kind of fundamental to the mission of the library and what free speech is all about. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yes, and thank you for pointing that out, because halfway through this, I gave up on my notes because this computer over on my other side is not doing what I want it to do. So I just was going on memory. But one of the things that I wanted to say was that the ALA really emphasizes that you have a good patron behavior policy and that you make it very known that that applies to not only people who are in the library for reading or studying or things like that, but also for program attendees and program presenters or meeting room groups. So the patron behavior policy that we have does address things like noise, how behavior escalates, what the expectations are, harassment. So like, it's one thing to have a meeting where somebody stands up and says like, all library staff are thieves. It's another thing to go to a specific staff member and say like, you're a thief and you're going to get what's coming to you, or something like that. So our patron behavior policy addresses a lot of that, and it is something that they recommend that you make sure that it's a very good patron behavior policy, so that when you have something that might escalate and you can reasonably anticipate that there might be something that comes out of that specific meeting based on, the topic or the people or just whatever emotionally charged situation, that you have your behavior policy and you can follow it.
Point.
That was very thorough and helpful. Yes, Mitch.
I first wanted to say that was great. I thought it was extremely concise and really, really obvious in all the good ways. Meaning, I wouldn't have thought about it exactly the same way myself, but once you went through it, like, yeah, of course it should be that way. So that's kind of where I want it to be. So that's good. I really appreciate that. I had a somewhat related question. Do we allow outside groups or outside people to set up displays of information, not just like a single brochure, but like a table or an outside group to come in and set up a book on a theme or hang artwork in the library? I know we have the artwork shows, which I think are library, I would think of them as library programming rather than outside programming, even though they are outside people, but maybe it's the other way, and how some of this stuff might apply to any of those situations.
We do. There are two policies that I can think of offhand that would apply there. One, we have a policy for community bulletin boards that
Okay.
just, it's mostly restrictions based on like the size
Yeah.
of the flyer, and like it can't be advertising something for money. Again, like very general, very broad, viewpoint neutral restrictions across the board. There's a length of time by which we'll hang things. And then separately, we have an exhibits policy for anybody that is looking to exhibit their work. Part of that one, again, like it doesn't really get too much into the detail of what the content or the ideas that you can express in your art, because again, you have to be really neutral with that. And I did come across in my research a few court cases that related to artwork exhibits, but because it's not relevant to this policy, I left them out. But
yeah,
future meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
know that's separate. I will occasionally see discussion online of such and such a library has a display of books that have one particular viewpoint in, a major international squabble, and how horrible they are that they're not balanced. Why does the library do that? And it always turns out to be, well, this is an outside group that comes in and can do this. And then the next month, the opposing outside group can come in and set that up. I have never heard of that kind of controversy here, thankfully. So I didn't know that we allowed outside groups to do that. So it was a curiosity.
we allow, and so I should be more precise with my language. We allow certain, like we have the glass case in the front, we have the art exhibits, and very occasionally we will have space for something additional to that. So like in celebration of the revolution, I believe Norm is bringing some banners, and it's just a week ahead of a program to kind of advertise the program. So on a limited basis, we have other spaces that we occasionally allow an exhibit. What we don't generally do is let people do a book display, and that notable exception there is tag. Bonnie will occasionally work with her teams to put up a book display.
But that's a library
as a library
sponsored thing.
program.
Yeah.
Yeah, and same thing with Meredith when she works with her tween group. It's usually collaborative with a librarian. And I think I would feel comfortable speaking on behalf of the rest of the staff that a lot of that is because, we just want to be very mindful about what we're displaying as a book display, because those are generally, even if you just took random blue books off the shelf and stuck them out there, people see it as a recommendation. So we just want to be really careful about how we do that. And generally, our staff have control of any kind of materials displays.
I just wanted to jump in real
And-
quick, just to add one. So we also work with one of the high school clubs. They always do an AAPI display. So they're required to bring, we work with them to research the materials. They bring the materials to us, like, and usually they bring a list, or sometimes they appear and they're like, here's our stack. And then they hand me the stack of books, and then we take a look at it and make sure it's all vetted through us and everything. And they let us see the display, things if we need to change it, if we need to add things, or if we need to, be like, maybe we need to go this direction. So we help guide them. But that's the only other like exception. So I just wanted to point that out too, since they're up right now.
Great, thank you. That makes sense.
Attached to that, Jen, does that community board policy and the exhibits policy have a similar limitation that it has to be a resident if it's not a library program? Because I think that would be an important, consistent, policy across the board.
Yes. So the community bulletin board policy, which I don't have in front of me, so the exact wording is not there, but essentially it has to be related to Northborough. It has to be of interest or relevance to Northborough, which means that generally, like, an event in Westborough would not necessarily be something that we would post, unless it was like a Northborough group that was participating. So there has to be a Northborough connection to it. The art exhibit is a little bit broader. We do artists that are not necessarily Northborough, just because it would be hard to, although lately so many requests for art exhibits that, we might even want to take a look at that. But Kate, I know, has our adult services librarian has taken over sort of managing the bookings for artists. And I know that she's gone a little bit outside of Northborough, but usually not out of state. And in most cases, unless it's a Northborough person that has come to her and asked if there's space. So like the Garden Club did one recently, the Northborough Cultural Council, the Arts Guild. She's doing the vetting beforehand and reaching out to these Worcester County or like the greater Boston area artists. So she's already taken a look at their work. And also, before we say yes to anything, we kind of have a quick discussion about, like, what is it that you want to display? And we're always very clear, if it's going in the meeting room, while we're not telling you what content you can and cannot exhibit, just know that this room is used for story time. And generally the artists understand, like, it should be suitable for all ages. But we are working on adding art hanging into the tap room, which is the upstairs meeting room, programming room. And that would be, because it's for teens and adults, maybe a slightly more mature audience would be acceptable. So, and I think there's something in our policy that says we retain discretion over what's inappropriate, although I would be very careful about applying that, because I'm
Right,
not
you'd have
going
to use legal standards probably.
Right.
The administrative committee has done a lot of work with Jen and team over the last, I'm going to say 18 to 24 months, going through, Jen and her team have done an amazing job going through every single policy that exists at the library, bringing up, from the oldest to the ones that just needed the attention. And one of the common themes is we do put a lot of trust in Jen and her staff. And there is a lot of language that is, I don't want to say open-ended because it really kind of gives the wrong impression, but we do, have a lot of leeway in there to make sure that people can feel included in the space in the library. They can feel seen in the programs, have an opportunity, to use the library as any other citizen of the town would have that, same equitable opportunity. I know that it will be interesting as we apply these policies, going forward. I know the world is an ever-changing place, and I think it's, now that we've gotten to a place that all of our policies are no more than 18 months old, I think we have a great place to start from as we look forward and start pressure testing some of these policies. So I do think it's a good opportunity, Jen, to thank you and your team for putting in the work to bring those policies to the administrative committee so we could take a look at them and then bring them to the, to the full board to be voted in. I mean, I think we just finished it at the last meeting. So good time to be having this ongoing conversation.
And it'll be time for a new round of updates.
Yeah, of course. But at
Fine.
least we've gotten to a place where there is consistency. Everything has been voted on, everything has been seen by the administrative committee, by this full board. So we're starting from a place where all the language even has been brought up to date. And that, that was a huge undertaking. So any future changes, I think, will be more of a minor, oh, here's an example that we didn't think of, kind of a tweak, rather than, oh my gosh, this policy has sat on the shelf for 15 years and is so wildly out of date that we might as well not have a policy. So at least we've gotten to a place where I personally feel much more comfortable where we are with our policies and procedures, and know that nothing's ever going to be perfect. And no matter what you put out there, someone's going to pressure test it. But I think we're in a much better position now than we have been for a while.
And I also think that obviously from Jen's excellent presentation, she has rooted everything into existing ALA programmatic regulations and explanations, and I think that will serve us well going forward into the future. And as long as we should stay within that as ALA upgrades its thinking on various aspects of the policy. Should we ever have a legal challenge of one kind or another, I think that would be a good place for us to be from a starting point.
I agree. And I also think that the tone of the library is set by the policies that it has. So if you start with your policies and make them no more restrictive than they need to be, then that trickles down into the way that you approach customer service and collection development and program planning and every other aspect of the building. So while they seem dry at times, and there's very like technical specific language sometimes, I really think that it's an important foundation to have.
Definitely.
Yep. And given that you've done this, and Jocelyn mentioning that you've been through all of the policies, I really want to thank the administrative committee for the hard work that they've done. It's been a long time. And again, the library staff working on this with their, their input. I just appreciate that you've done the work to get us to where we are today. So thank you all. That's it. Any other comments? Because if there aren't any, then I can announce that the date of the next meeting will be June 10th, 2025. I think we'll be remote. We didn't make plans to get together, did we? I think not. All right, it will be remote. And unless there's any other business that may come before the board at this time, I would be happy to have someone make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Jim, you're going to move? Thank you.
I will second. Beth Thomas.
Beth is seconding. Thank you, Beth.
Jim, make sure you email that motion to yourself.
I will.
All right. So all those in favor of adjourning the meeting, Brittany Burns,
Brittany Burns, aye.
Mitch Cohen,
Rich Cohen, yes.
Pat Fons,
Pat Fonsi.
Jim Hogan,
Jim Hogan, aye.
Jocelyn McElhenney,
Jocelyn McElhenney, aye.
Beth Thomas,
Beth Thomas, aye.
Richard Tucker,
Richard Tucker, aye.
and Michelle Rehill also says aye. The motion carries in the affirmative. It is unanimous. The meeting is adjourned at 8:05 p.m. Thank you, everybody, for participating. It's great to see you all.